Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 156 Coercion 2. I shall face this person. Flee to the poison-wielding elder, mortal. Upon hearing Chong Ryong's words, Mok Jae-eun realized her intent to engage the society leader's first disciple, eldest young master Na Yul-riang, in order to buy time. Mok Jae-eun's eyes sharpened at this. Her judgment was undoubtedly correct. The gap between himself and eldest young master Na Yul-riang, who had overcome his wall and ascended to the transformation realm, was vast. At present, fleeing was the only answer. However, two issues remained. First, by left ankle. It seemed Chong Ryong had failed to notice in her haste that Na Yul-riang had swiftly crushed Mok Jae-eun's left ankle, fracturing the bone. This was no coincidence. It was a calculated move to hinder his mobility and prevent his escape. A person like Na Yul-riang, so similar to Mok Jae-eun, would not release him so lightly merely because Chong Ryong, or his assumed junior sister, had appeared. Second, the Poison King. Baek Saha, the Poison King, who had also reached the transformation realm, could likely protect Mok Jae-eun from Na Yul-riang. However, Mok Jae-eun's thoughts did not end there. His gaze shifted to eldest young master Na Yul-riang, who was engaged in battle with Chong Ryong. If the person was truly akin to himself, this would not be the end. He will seek to kill me by any means necessary. Even under the Poison King Baek Saha's protection, Na Yul-riang would undoubtedly attempt to eliminate Mok Jae-eun through whatever method he could devise. He had already made up his mind to do so. It was both instinct and conviction. Troublesome. Just as he was finding his footing, this was a truly vexing variable. Failure to overcome it would mean death before vengeance. As his thoughts reached this point, Mok Jae-eun began seeking a new solution. I need more power. Power was necessary to protect himself from eldest young master Na Yul-riang, not anyone else. However, this could not be achieved in a short time. Even in the current martial arts world, only an extremely small number of innately gifted individuals could attain enlightenment, shatter their threshold, and reach the transformation realm. Ascending to such a realm was not a feat that could be accomplished through talent alone. Yet, could it work? A scene flashed through Mok Jae-eun's mind. It was the moment when the Poison King Baek Saha attained enlightenment and surpassed his threshold. Although invisible to others, Mok Jae-eun, who had opened his ghost eye, remembered what had transpired within Baek Saha's body as he broke through his threshold. Energy had traversed 3 points, forming the 3 yang of essence, energy, and spirit. The reason behind this occurrence was unknown. However, he was confident in his ability to replicate it almost identically from memory. Is it possible? The act of forcibly inducing the 3 yang without enlightenment. There was no way to know if this would succeed. Perhaps it would lead to chi deviation, endangering his life. Then Mok Jae-eun's eyes fell upon eldest young master Na Yul-riang, who was fiercely crossing swords with Chong Ryong. For now it remained a stalemate. However, as it was daytime, Chong Ryong, a vengeful spirit, was at a disadvantage. It would not be long before the person could repel Chong Ryong's sword. Such was the extent of his extraordinary talent with the blade. Ha! Ha! Mok Jae-eun attempted to move his left ankle. The pain was still immense. It would likely be difficult to even put weight on his left foot. It will be challenging in a short time. Even with his exceptional recovery ability, a fractured bone could not heal instantaneously. Na Yul-riang was gradually adapting to Chong Ryong's swordsmanship. At this, Mok Jae-eun made his decision. It will be a gamble. Regardless, the moment he moved, it was evident that eldest young master Na Yul-riang would cease his duel with Chong Ryong and change course. In that case, he had no choice but to take the risk, even if it carried a higher degree of danger. Fortunately, his energy was composed of deathly chi, making it difficult for others to accurately detect. Even Na Yul-riang, who had reached the transformation realm, had failed to discern it properly. Thus, even if he were to channel his energy through the 3 yang here, it would be challenging for others to notice. Phew! Mok Jae-eun, lying down, contemplated the energy within his body. Then, recalling the Poison King Baek Saha, who had shattered his threshold, he slowly began to circulate his energy, intending to forcibly break through. It must be done in reverse. He had nearly made a mistake in that instant. The energy Mok Jae-eun wielded was not the energy of life, but the energy of the deceased. The approach had to be the opposite of the norm. Rumble. With that, Mok Jaeung-un began forcibly piercing through the threshold by circulating his deathly chi through his reverse acupoints, relying on his memory. The deathly chi gathered and spread throughout his body as it circulated through the reverse acupoints. He perfectly recreated the phenomenon that had occurred within Baek Saha's body. First, the lower danjian. Rumble. The concentrated deathly chi passed through the essence of the lower danjian. Then it converged near the chest before spreading throughout the body, forming the yin through the deathly chi in the reverse acupoints of the middle danjian, the energy. The second is also a success. If the supreme masters who had surpassed their thresholds were to witness Mok Jaeung-un's current actions, they would have been unable to conceal their astonishment. This was because it differed from the typical three-yang convergence. Originally, the three-yang convergence, also known as the three-yang gathering, referred to the convergence of yang within yin, and yang within yin and yang, with the three yang heading towards the inner origin and returning to the heavenly palace. However, due to the reverse acupoints, Mok Jaeung-un's process was the opposite. It was literally the three-yin convergence. This was yin within yang, yin within yin, and yin within yin and yang. In other words, the three yin were heading towards the inner origin, with the heavenly palace inversely returning. Ugh! Beads of sweat formed on Mok Jaeung-un's forehead, and faint steam escaped from his mouth. Finally, the energy had to penetrate the top of his head, but this was proving difficult as it was a forceful attempt without enlightenment. At that moment, whoosh! Eldest young master Na Yelriang launched his figure towards Mok Jaeung-un with lightning speed. It was to prevent him from accomplishing whatever he was attempting. Mok Jaeung-un, who was focusing all his attention on piercing through the spirit in order to achieve something, was unable to notice this. However, swish! Chong Ryong blocked Na Yelriang's path. As if I would allow anyone to interfere. Whether forcibly forming the three yang of essence, energy and spirit without enlightenment was possible or not, if Mok Jaeung-un were to be interrupted here he would undoubtedly die. In any case, that mortal brat. It was not audacity but sheer recklessness. She had told him to flee while she held off this person, yet he was engaging in such a perilous challenge at this very moment. Regardless, she had to protect that mortal. Do not interfere. Swish, 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 swish. At that instant, a dazzling trajectory resembling a meteor shower was drawn from eldest young master Na Yelriang's sword energy. Chong Ryong's gaze turned frigid for a fleeting moment. This was the heavenly sword meteor, one of the 3 secret techniques of the heavenly sword swordsmanship. It was a sword technique the person had created while gazing upon the falling stars in the night sky. Although her resentment ran deep, she had no choice but to acknowledge that these 3 secret techniques devised by the person were truly unparalleled and could be considered supreme. While they were called secret techniques, flawless and domineering sword techniques, it's not without weaknesses. Chong Ryong, who had deconstructed the person's swordsmanship over 100 years, had discovered the sole weakness in this technique. Amidst the densely packed sword techniques that approached like a meteor shower, there was a single trajectory that could be exploited. If she were to thrust a single sword towards that spot, stab, swish, swish, swish. At that moment, Na Yelriang's sword techniques abruptly changed direction, entrapping Chong Ryong's single sword that had aimed for the opening. A variation? It was an entirely unexpected sword path. As a result, the pipe created by spiritual power was trapped within the trajectory of the strong energy and instantly disintegrated. However, this was not the end. Swish, swish. Oh no! Chong Ryong swiftly utilized her lightness skill to evade the sword trajectories that targeted her. Her eyes sharpened as she dodged. She had discovered the method to break the heavenly sword meteor through countless deconstructions, but it had been refined to the point of being even more formidable, far beyond her expectations. I underestimated the person. The person, too, had once vied for the title of the world's greatest swordsman alongside her. As time had passed, it was only natural for him to develop his sword techniques and compensate for their weaknesses, yet she had been too fixated on the past. It was a mistake. Chong Ryong inwardly reflected on her error. At that moment, Na Yelriang, who had been pressuring Chong Ryong with his dense sword techniques, forcefully thrust his sword energy towards her brow. In that instant, boom! A sharp sword energy of blue hue sliced through the air. It was the sword energy blast, a technique that could directly launch condensed strong energy. Oh no! The final strike was a sword energy blast from an inescapable position. Chong Ryong hastily crossed her hands and created a red blood-like barrier using spiritual power. Crash. However, the power of the sword energy blast, the final strike that served as the climax of the sword techniques, was so immense that her body soared through the air along with the blood barrier. Without missing that very moment, Na Yolriang changed his direction. And then, he unleashed another sword energy blast, aiming it towards Mok Jaeongun. Where do you think you're going? Chong Ryong, who had been launched into the air, disregarded her gaze and everything else, waving her hand. Blood from the ground rose in the form of thorns, attempting to pierce Na Yolriang's right shoulder as he tried to extend his sword. Humph. Na Yolriang hurriedly twisted his body. Thanks to that, the trajectory of the sword energy blast slightly deviated from its original intention. The blue sword energy extended in a straight line, piercing not Mok Jaeongun's neck as originally intended, but right beside it. Boom boom boom. As a result, the strong energy penetrated the ground, raising fragments and dust. The power was sufficiently potent. To this extent, the shockwave alone might have disrupted Mok Jaeongun's attempt to achieve his breakthrough, causing him to suffer critical injuries or even death. This is not enough. As visibility was obscured, even with his penetrating eye, Na Yolriang, who had been unable to properly confirm the situation, launched his figure towards Mok Jaeongun. Bang! Chong Ryong, who had soared into the air and deflected Na Yolriang's sword energy blast, also propelled her figure towards Mok Jaeongun. He probably hadn't finished his breakthrough yet, and everything might have been ruined by the previous sword energy blast. Whoosh. I have to stop it. In any case, she had already unleashed her power as a vengeful spirit. In that case, without any further hesitation, it was at that very moment. Gasp. Whoosh. Suddenly, an unknown energy began to surge from within the hazy dust in all directions. Chong Ryong's eyes widened. The energy surging from within the dust was of a distinctly different nature compared to the deathly chi that could be considered the energy of death. What energy is this vicious? Gasp. Na Yolriang, who had been propelling his figure, abruptly came to a halt. It was at that precise moment. From within the dust obscuring their vision. Boom. A black strong energy extended towards Na Yolriang's face with tremendous force, accompanied by a circular shockwave. Na Yolriang hastily blocked the black strong energy targeting his head with his blue sword energy. Clang 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 clang. Sparks of pale blue light erupted as the strong energies collided. The clash of strong energies, almost at a stalemate, neither side yielding. What in the world? Na Yolriang's eyes sharpened. This black strong energy exuded a brutality and ferocity he had never experienced before. The momentum was so vicious that it disrupted the convergence of his own strong energy. This won't do. Forcibly clashing energies led to the loss of true energy. Realizing it was futile, Na Yolriang extended one foot back, applying force to his Yongchuan acupoint, and used the technique of borrowing force to redirect, to divert the incoming strong energy to the side. Boom. Crash 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 crash. The black strong energy tore through the ground, shattering a wall nearly 5 jang in length. From the aftermath of this strong energy, Na Yolriang could instinctively comprehend. How could this be possible? Grip. Strength filled Na Yolriang's hand. It was unbelievable. The person had shattered his threshold and entered the same realm as himself. Swish swish swish. Mok Jaeongun's figure emerged from the dissipating dust. At the sight of his appearance, Na Yolriang's expression grew even more solemn. It was clearly visible to his penetrating eye, which could penetrate through energy. Mok Jaeongun, with black energy materializing and surging throughout his body. Enveloped in the exceedingly vicious black energy, his appearance was reminiscent of a demon that had ascended from hell. Chapter 157 Coercion 3. It was not only him who was surprised. Chong Ryong was also astonished by the vicious energy emanating from Mok Jaeongun's entire body. What is this energy? It might be difficult for ordinary people to perceive clearly. However, the energy of Mok Jaeongun, visible through her ghost eye, was both ferocious and ominous beyond compare. This energy had become significantly different from the deathly chi that could be considered the energy of the deceased. Whoosh. Originally, the three-yang convergence referred to the energy penetrating the essence, energy and spirit, completely opening the yin and du meridians and surpassing one's limits. However, Mok Jaeong-un had forcibly pierced through it using the opposite method of reverse acupoint energy circulation with deathly qi. He had achieved this through the contrasting yin. The energy that had been condensed and exploded through the three yang had now transformed. A new energy had been born, unlike anything Chong Ryong, who had existed for over 100 years, had ever encountered before. Vicious, ferocious, the embodiment of ominousness. How was such energy created? This is truly akin to a demon. It differed from both the vengeful and malevolent spirits. It had completely transformed into a new energy unique to Mok Jaeong-un himself. At that moment, eldest young master Na Yol-ryang, the society leader's first disciple, spoke. I thought you were just an immature brat even if we were of the same ilk. You bastard. You're a more bothersome existence than I anticipated. I share a similar opinion. It was mutual. Mok Jaeong-un also recognized eldest young master Na Yol-ryang as someone who needed to be killed rather than a mere tool to be exploited. In response to Mok Jaeong-un's answer, Na Yol-ryang clicked his tongue. Then he spoke again. Are you truly human? Na Yol-ryang's question was entirely reasonable. In this urgent situation, Mok Jaeong-un had performed the outrageous feat of forcibly breaking through his threshold. It was an absurd pace of advancement and a gamble with his life on the line. I am human. Do you think I might turn into a monster? A monster. That makes sense too. That ominous black energy emanating from you. It's like a demon from hell. A demon. At these words, Mok Jaeong-un chuckled. A demon, he said. He understood why Na Yol-ryang would say such a thing. Since it was his own energy, he could comprehend it even more clearly. Forget the viciousness within you. Only then can you live on. Come to think of it, those were the words his grandfather had spoken to him since childhood. He had assumed it was simply due to a strong sense of liberation, a desire to destroy something. However, this energy that had transformed after penetrating the essence, energy and spirit. Somehow it did not feel unfamiliar. The darkness and chaos that seemed to suck him into an abyss felt as though they originated from himself. Demonic energy. Not bad. Then shall we call this demonic qi? Demonic qi? Ha. You speak as if you're some kind of sect leader. Who knows? More importantly, it's intriguing. Those eyes of yours. Can you see my energy with those eyes? Mok Jaeong-un, who had opened his ghost eye, could clearly discern. Na Yol-ryang's right eye, from which a silver light flowed, was certainly extraordinary. However, Mok Jaeong-un's words became the trigger. As soon as the question ended, whoosh, Na Yol-ryang's figure swiftly charged towards Mok Jaeong-un. Before forcibly achieving the three-yin convergence, Mok Jaeong-un had struggled to grasp Na Yol-ryang's movements. But now that he had accomplished it, I can see. He could finally perceive Na Yol-ryang's movements. As Mok Jaeong-un extended his hand, the wicked blade that had fallen to the ground was drawn into his palm. Whoosh! Black strong energy surged from the wicked blade. Simultaneously, Mok Jaeong-un swung his sword diagonally upward. Clang! At that moment, sparks erupted as the blue sword energy collided with the black strong energy of the wicked blade. Skid! At the same time, Mok Jaeong-un's figure was pushed back by about 2 steps. Although he could grasp Na Yol-ryang's movements, Na Yol-ryang still held the upper hand in terms of martial power. Having forcibly broken through the threshold without enlightenment, Mok Jaeong-un was still inferior to Na Yol-ryang in martial power. However, Na Yol-ryang's expression was not particularly pleased. He has become capable of properly perceiving my movements. Although he could still claim superiority as Mok Jaeong-un had just broken through his threshold, the fact that someone who had merely been at the pinnacle of peak realm had entered the same realm as himself in an instant was significant. The realm of transformation. This was not something that could be ignored and brushed aside. This won't do. He had to kill Mok Jaeong-un on the spot to prevent future troubles. Eldest young master Na Yol-ryang, who had elevated Mok Jaeong-un from a future headache to a dangerous individual who must be eliminated, no longer held back his energy and unleashed his martial power to the extreme. Rumble. As Na Yol-ryang raised his energy, the grains of sand on the ground began to tremble and heave. Abandon any thoughts of returning alive. Will that be easy? Rumble. In response, Mok Jaeon also raised his martial power to the extreme. Having just broken through his threshold, his energy had not yet stabilized, but if he did not match Na Yolriang's momentum, he would be cut down by the overwhelming force. Clang! Clang! Na Yolriang's eyes narrowed as he clashed sword energy with Mok Jaeon. He was clearly superior in martial power. However, as his sword energy made contact with Mok Jaeon's, a phenomenon of gradual dispersion began to occur. It seemed to be due to the destructive nature of this energy. As a result, Mok Jaeon did not easily yield, drawing upon more true energy to prevent his energy from scattering. Bothersome. Realizing that a clash of martial power would not suffice, Na Yolriang stomped his foot on the ground. Thud. Crack. At that moment, the ground beneath Mok Jaeon's feet shattered, causing his figure to waver. Not missing this opportunity. Clang. Na Yolriang deflected the clashing strong energy with his sword strike and aimed for Mok Jaeon's left shoulder. However, gasp. A sharp murderous intent was sensed from behind. Oh no. Na Yolriang kicked off the ground and twisted his body, enveloping himself with strong energy. Whoosh. As he rotated his body, the strong energy formed a whirlwind, scattering sharp murderous intent in all directions. Clang 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 clang. His senses are keen. Clang 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 clang. Chong Ryong, who had attempted to target Na Yolriang's back in an instant, blocked the flying strong energy with her pipe. Of course, Mok Jaeon also stabilized his wavering figure and deflected Na Yolriang's strong energy, seeking an opening to exploit. There were no gaps in this technique of enveloping oneself with strong energy. He's still stronger than you. We need to cooperate. I will obstruct his movements so. Before Chong Ryong could finish her words, Mok Jaeon shook his head. What? What was this fellow thinking? If they did not kill eldest young master Na Yolriang on the spot, they would create the worst enemy within the Heaven and Earth Society. Forcibly breaking through the threshold was indeed a miraculous feat, but the opponent was already a supreme master who had reached the transformation realm, so Mok Jaeon's chances of victory alone were still low. Still too risky. I have spare puppet figures, so hide yourself. What? I sensed a vast curse power from that direction. At Mok Jaeon's words, Chong Ryong's eyes flickered with surprise. She had thought he wouldn't be able to pay attention to anything else while focused on the person, but had the fellow also detected it? In fact, Chong Ryong had also sensed the curse power. Curse power could be considered the foundation of sorcery and magic. The moment Chong Ryong fully unleashed her power as a vengeful spirit, known as spiritual power, a wave of vast curse power had surged. It likely meant that an exceptional diviner had noticed her presence. It wouldn't be long before the diviner tracked down her location. However, Chong Ryong was willing to take that risk to assist Mok Jaeon. No. Then you'll be in danger, mortal. I'm fine now. You know what it means if the diviner here has noticed, right? At Mok Jaeon's telepathic message, she fell silent. What was this fellow thinking? Even if he had broken through his threshold, he would still be at a disadvantage in terms of martial prowess. Whoosh. At that moment, Chong Ryong and Mok Jaeon simultaneously glanced at a certain direction. Just now, the vast curse power had spread throughout the entire inner city. It meant that the pursuit had begun. Hurry. Do you want to ruin everything? After a moment of hesitation, Chong Ryong finally spoke. If you sense danger, immediately flee to the poison-wielding elder. With the current gap, she believed he could escape to that distance. With those words, Chong Ryong merged into Mok Jaeon's body. Swish. At that moment, Na Yolriang, who had been indiscriminately scattering strong energy while rotating, stopped. Then he steadied his breathing and surveyed the surroundings with his right eye. Where had that existence taking the form of Wai Soyun gone? It was impossible for her to escape his penetrating eye, yet she was nowhere to be seen. Na Yolriang glared at Mok Jaeon and spoke. Where did that woman go? In response to that question, Mok Jaeon shrugged and replied. What are you talking about? The youngest disciple? No. That strange existence taking the form of the youngest disciple. I have no idea what you're saying. Who are you referring to? What? Na Yolriang scoffed in disbelief. They had been engaging in battle until now, so what nonsense was he spouting? Do you take this young master for a fool? She was clearly in front of you and suddenly disappeared. Do you think I wouldn't have noticed even while rapidly rotating? The issue was that at the moment of her disappearance, her energy had also vanished completely. Even with his penetrating eye, he couldn't locate her, so Na Yolriang was on guard in all directions. He didn't know when or where she might appear. Facing such a Na Yolriang, Mok Jaeongun smiled and said, "Perhaps you're seeing things." Na Yolriang's expression turned frigid. After staring intently at Mok Jaeongun, Na Yolriang tilted his neck to the side and stretched his muscles. Crack, crack. It seems you're misunderstanding something. Misunderstanding? Yes. You've merely gained the qualification to face this young master. Don't mistake that for becoming equal. Swish. As soon as those words ended, Na Yolriang's figure scattered like smoke. In response, Mok Jaeongun swung the wicked blade upward. Clang. Sparks erupted as the black strong energy collided with the blue sword energy. Then Mok Jaeongun twisted his body to the side and slashed the wicked blade towards the air once more. Something seemed to appear and disappear like it was dissipating. Swish. Swish. Afterimages were left intermittently, and each time, Mok Jaeongun's wicked blade slashed at them. This phenomenon of continuously leaving faint afterimages was none other than the shifting form and changing position technique. Na Yolriang was currently employing an ultra-high-speed lightness skill, rendering his figure invisible except for the moment of attack. Of course. Swish swish swish. Mok Jaeongun's pupils were rapidly trembling. In those eyes, Na Yolriang's shadow was imprinted in each fleeting moment. He was capturing the instantaneous movements. However, since he couldn't match that level of speed with his lightness skill, he could only respond to the brief moments when Na Yolriang attacked. A single mistake, a single error, and your life will end. Na Yolriang relentlessly pressured Mok Jaeongun. Each sword strike that accompanied his ultra-high-speed movement was a fatal technique. Having just broken through his threshold and entered the same realm as Na Yolriang, Mok Jaeongun had not yet fully embodied his own abilities. That clumsiness would lead to his own. Swish. It was at that moment. Mok Jaeongun moved his foot. He was trying to disrupt the flow, but he would never allow. Clang. At that instant, Mok Jaeongun's figure followed behind Na Yolriang's back, and black strong energy aimed for his chest. Na Yolriang lightly blocked it and resumed his ultra-high-speed movement. Tap 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 tap. At the speed an ordinary person would take one step, he took nearly 20 steps. Those steps were graceful and swift like flowing water. However, tap 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 tap. One of Na Yolriang's eyebrows raised. He had considered it a momentary coincidence, but before he knew it, Mok Jaeongun was once again attempting to follow his movements. Moreover, the footsteps he left behind. Clear and manifest water-crossing steps? He was imitating Na Yolriang's own lightness skill, the clear and manifest water-crossing steps. The clear and manifest water-crossing steps, which enabled the most ideal ultra-high-speed movement at close range, was not a technique passed down by the society leader but a secret of Na Yolriang's own family, the Na clan. Na Yolriang was dumbfounded for a moment. He too could analyze the opponent's martial arts within a short time using his cold-hearted mind and insight, adapting his own martial arts accordingly. However, this person was taking a different approach. You dare try to steal this young master's technique in the midst of our duel? It was utterly absurd. He had never encountered someone like this before. Not only had he met someone similar to himself for the first time, but that person's talent might even surpass his own. This won't do. Na Yolriang's eyes glinted with strong killing intent. He was already using his full power, but he had not yet employed the 3 secret techniques of the Heavenly Sword. Even though Mok Jaeongun had entered the same realm, Na Yolriang still did not consider him an opponent worthy of using those techniques. However, his thoughts had now changed. He had to quickly kill the person even if it meant using the secret techniques. Gasp. At the intense energy felt in close proximity, Na Yolriang stopped his lightness skill. The same went for Mok Jaeongun. Their gazes simultaneously turned towards the figure who had approached them. It was none other than Poison King. The Poison King Baeksa. Eldest young master. This is quite unexpected. The reason for eldest young master Na Yolriang's remark was simple. It was due to Baeksa's appearance, which had become noticeably younger compared to before. Moreover, the energy of Baeksa, visible through his penetrating eye, had grown incomparably stronger than before. You have broken through your threshold. In response to his words, the Poison King Beksaha scoffed and said, Eldest young master, may I ask what you were doing with my disciple? It was a straightforward question. It was a kind of warning, asked despite already knowing the answer. Instead of answering, Na Yelriang looked at Mok Jiongun with a hint of regret. Then he chuckled and said, You're fortunate. At his words, Beksaha inwardly clicked his tongue. Even though he had appeared here and revealed that Mok Jiongun was his disciple, Na Yelriang still boldly refused to extinguish his hostility and killing intent. He was truly an arrogant individual both then and now. This was one of the reasons why Beksaha did not support him. Swish. The blue strong energy that had enveloped Na Yelriang's finger dissipated. In response, Mok Jiongun also released his strong energy. Doubt crept into Beksaha's eyes as he observed this. Why was the color of the strong energy enveloping Mok Jiongun's sword such a dark hue? Moreover, the power within the strong energy seemed extraordinary. Just what happened here? He couldn't hide his bewilderment. With Mok Jiongun's level of martial prowess, he should not have been able to confront eldest young master Na Yelriang. However, judging from the traces of aftermath in the surroundings and a glance from afar, it seemed they had been fighting on almost equal footing. What on earth is going on? In that moment of perplexity, eldest young master Na Yelriang spoke to Beksaha. Poison King. Congratulations on achieving a breakthrough. Then this young master shall take his leave. With those words, Na Yelriang attempted to depart without hesitation. Seeing this, Beksaha felt a sense of relief in that fleeting moment. Whoosh. At that instant, Na Yelriang, who had been about to turn around, suddenly and unexpectedly thrust his finger towards Mok Jiongun's chest. Mok Jiongun hastily grabbed his wrist, but it had already penetrated nearly 2 joints deep. Stab. Eldest young master. Beksaha shouted, his voice laced with anger. In response, Na Yelriang smiled contentedly and said, Did you think I would spare this bastard's life and simply leave? With his finger pierced into Mok Jiongun's chest, the situation was already over. If his finger were to penetrate just an inch further, it would reach the heart. In any case, Na Yelriang held a significant advantage in martial power, so grabbing his wrist was futile. However, this bastard. Mok Jiongun was grinning, his smile stretching from ear to ear in an eerie manner. He was smiling even though his life was hanging by a thread? Have you gone mad? Thank you for allowing yourself to be caught. What? It was at that very moment. Snap. Na Yelriang's wrist was twisted and broken. Chapter 158, Coercion 4. Snap. Ugh. Eldest young master Na Yelriang's wrist was twisted and broken. Na Yelriang frantically tried to shake off his broken wrist. However, crack. This fiend. He couldn't move his wrist at all. It was the same even when he raised his right hand's martial power to the 10th level. Mok Jiongun said to him, What's wrong? Is it difficult to pull out your hand? Na Yelriang's eyes sharpened. Although the pain from his broken wrist bone should have been agonizing, Na Yelriang instead glared at Mok Jiongun with a look of disbelief. The person's martial power was below his own, so there was no way he could break his wrist. However, a strange phenomenon occurred. Suddenly, the person's martial power surged to twice its previous level. Wondering what was going on, Na Yelriang noticed that the veins on Mok Jiongun's right hand, which was grasping his wrist, had become bulging, black and grotesque. What is this? Na Yelriang could see through his penetrating eye. Mok Jiongun's right hand had an eerily surging energy. This was not a normal form of power. This person has learned a bizarre technique. How he learned it was not important. What mattered was that Mok Jiongun's martial power had surpassed his own, limited to his right hand. At this, whoosh, Na Yelriang raised his left hand's finger, generating a blue sword energy. He then attempted to behead Mok Jiongun in a single stroke. This person must be killed on the spot or he would be far too dangerous. Swish. Clang. However, at that moment Na Yelriang's sword energy was stopped before it could even touch Mok Jiongun's neck. The one who blocked it was none other than Poison King. The Poison King Beksa. Without using poison, he had created strong energy with his hand and blocked Na Yelriang's sword energy in an instant. Beksaha said to eldest young master Na Yelriang, You intend to kill my disciple right in front of me? At Baek Saha's words, Na Yelriang's gaze turned frigid. That person, his disciple, had broken his wrist and was still grasping it, yet Baek Saha was trying to protect him? At this, Na Yelriang warned in a low voice. Are you willing to make an enemy of this young master for the sake of a mere disciple? Will that truly benefit the Baek clan? Are you threatening me now? Faced with Na Yelriang's forceful words, anger seeped into the Poison King Baek Saha's voice as well. No matter how close Na Yelriang was to being the society leader's successor, Baek Saha was one of the 5 kings, a high-ranking executive of the Heaven and Earth Society. In terms of position, he could even be considered above Na Yelriang. No matter how arrogant Na Yelriang was, to provoke him in such a manner? I now clearly understand how you view me and the Baek clan. Then let me warn you as well. If you do not immediately withdraw, I will do my utmost to prevent you from becoming the successor. What? The expression of Na Yelriang, who was receiving a warning in return, grew even more ferocious. All his attention was focused on somehow killing Mok Jiongun, yet this old man kept interfering, fueling his anger even further. Did I not say it? If you do not step back, I will ensure to obstruct you from becoming the successor. Poison King. Rumble. As Na Yelriang's voice rose, his aura surged menacingly. The wind swirled, causing his clothes to flutter. Likewise, as if unwilling to be outdone in terms of aura, the Poison King Baek Saha began releasing a poisonous energy from his entire body. Rumble. A purple poisonous energy rose, exuding an ominous aura. His poisonous energy, having become a complete poison master after reaching the 8th stage of the Wave Demon Poison scripture, was incomparable to before. As Baek Saha took a step forward, sizzle. Part of the ground was being corroded. In an instant, the atmosphere intensified. It would not be surprising if the two were to engage in a life-and-death battle at any moment. However, that would signify a complete confrontation between them, so Baek Saha was cautious, and in Na Yelriang's case, with one of his wrists grasped by Mok Jiongun, neither of them made the first move. It was at that precise moment. Shudder. An immense killing intent surged. As if the sudden killing intent was a signal flare, Na Yelriang and Baek Saha reflexively separated their clashing hands and unleashed lethal techniques towards each other. Clang clang clang. In an instant, their hands collided about 4 times at close range. It was a simplified exchange of techniques. Sizzle. Whoosh. As the poisonous energy and murderous intent clashed, the surrounding ground corroded and cracked. However, their confrontation did not continue from there. The reason being, this bastard, Mok Jiongun, who had been grasping Na Yelriang's wrist, pulled his body into an embrace while still holding his wrist. Na Yelriang was momentarily dumbfounded. To engage in such antics at this critical moment, had this bastard gone mad? Let go immediately. I can't do that, master. Please grab eldest young master's left hand. What? Grab. At Mok Jiongun's words, Baek Saha reflexively grabbed Na Yelriang's left hand, with which he had been exchanging techniques. As a result, Na Yelriang was unable to move either his right or left hand. Na Yelriang clicked his tongue in disbelief. These bastards, seriously? Na Yelriang drew upon the energy from his entire body and released sharp murderous intent through his skin. Swish 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 swish. For a supreme master of the sword like him, his entire body was akin to a sharp weapon. However, even as this sharp murderous intent pierced his body, Mok Jiongun remained motionless and instead embraced Na Yelriang even tighter. Crack. This person's left hand's energy? Na Yelriang furrowed his brows. The energy in Mok Jiongun's left hand, which was wrapped around his waist, was extraordinary. From this, Na Yelriang could discern. It's not limited to one hand? It seemed Mok Jiongun could unleash that strange technique with both hands. As Mok Jiongun applied more force to his left hand encircling Na Yelriang's waist, he felt his upper body being compressed. At this, Na Yelriang's eyes completely lost their sanity. You son of a bitch. Already filled with madness, his anger reached its peak, and he tilted his head to the side and headbutted Mok Jiongun, who was embracing him with the force of his 10th-level martial power. Bang. Crack. Ugh. Mok Jiongun's head was thrown back from the headbutt. Not missing this opportunity, Na Yelriang headbutted him again. Bang. Ack. Blood spurted from Mok Jiongun's forehead where he was headbutted. Na Yelriang let out a crazed laugh and headbutt the bleeding Mok Jaeun once more. Ha ha ha. Try keeping your hold now. Bang. 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 After about 3 headbutts at that moment, veins bulged on Mok Jaeun's forehead, turning black. Then just like Na Yelriang, Mok Jaeun tilted his head back and headbutted him. Crack. Ugh. Oof. The heads of the two who had headbutted each other simultaneously were thrown back. The force was enough to send them flying apart, but they didn't separate as Mok Jaeun held Na Yelriang tightly. However, both their faces were covered in blood, to the point of making one frown. Ha! That was Baek Saha's current expression. Although he had helped Mok Jaeun upon his request, this could hardly be considered a martial arts confrontation. He had no idea how things had turned out this way. As he was thinking that, eldest young master Na Yelriang, his face distorted, opened his eyes and displayed a crazed look. I'll kill you. It seemed he would only be satisfied by killing Mok Jaeun on the spot for dragging him into this dogfight. At this, Na Yelriang unleashed the technique of the golden silkworm and unexpectedly freed his left hand, which had been grasped by Baek Saha. Bang. What? But it was at that very moment. Sizzle, 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 sizzle. The parts of his body in contact with the person felt like they were burning in pain. The reason was the crimson poisonous energy rising from Mok Jaeun's entire body as he embraced Na Yelriang. Na Yelriang's expression contorted at the materialized crimson poisonous energy. This was none other than Poison Master? Releasing poisonous energy from one's entire body was something only possible for those who had reached the realm of a Poison Master. No way. Even the Poison King Baek Saha couldn't hide his shock upon witnessing this scene. He had surmised that Mok Jaeun's martial prowess had increased at an alarming rate, but it was still unbelievable. He had not yet properly taught Mok Jaeun the Wave Demon Poison scripture. He had merely shown him the secret art once. Yet now, Mok Jaeun was displaying the Poison Master body, which could only be unleashed upon reaching the 8th stage of the Wave Demon Poison scripture. How can this be? How was this possible for someone who had only seen the secret art of the Wave Demon Poison scripture once? Then could it be that he had broken through his threshold? In an instant, goosebumps rose all over the Poison King Baek Saha's body. He was not easily surprised by most things, but this was something he couldn't help but be shocked by. Was this truly possible? It was at that moment. Sizzle. Arg. For the first time, a scream of pain erupted from Na Yelriang's mouth. Even for an expert of the transformation realm like him, it was impossible to block all the penetrating poisons while being embraced by someone who had become a poison master, releasing poisonous energy from their entire body. That was the terror of a poison master who themselves became poison. With a mere touch they become a lethal venomous hand. Arg. Enduring this immense pain, Na Yelriang raised his sword energy on the finger of his left hand, which he had freed using the golden silkworm technique. Whoosh. Bitch. Then he attempted to pierce Mok Jaeun's left ear and penetrate his head as Mok Jaeun tightly embraced him. However, at that moment, smack, someone forcefully struck the back of Na Yelriang's head. It was none other than the Poison King Baek Saha. No matter how much of a transformation realm expert Na Yelriang was, he couldn't help but have his mind go blank and his inner energy disrupted by this unexpected blow. Not missing this chance, Baek Saha sealed his acupoints. Tap 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 tap. With his acupoints sealed, Na Yelriang's head drooped. At this, Baek Saha hurriedly dissuaded Mok Jaeun. Enough. Stop it. In response to his words, Mok Jaeun shook his head and said, We must kill him. I don't know what happened, but if we kill eldest young master now, we will die by the society leader's hand. Are you fine with that? Swish 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 swish. At his words, Mok Jaeun, who had been hesitating for a moment, released his poison master body. Then he removed his arms from Na Yelriang's body, which he had been embracing. Thud. The unconscious Na Yelriang collapsed to the ground limply. After glancing at the fallen Na Yelriang, Mok Jaeun turned his gaze towards Baek Saha and said, It's troublesome, but eldest young master is better as an enemy than the society leader. Oh my. At Mok Jaeun's words, the Poison King Baek Saha clicked his tongue. It seemed he had not properly seen this fellow's true nature. Baek Saha took something out from his bosom. It was a red cloth bundle. Inside the cloth was a golden elixir pill with a faint fragrance. What is that? Poison avoidance bead. Poison avoidance bead? It's a poison avoidance bead made for consumption, capable of detoxifying most poisons. Most poisons? Yes. The poison avoidance bead was an elixir pill with the highest efficacy in detoxification. Just the ingredients alone cost 1,000 gold pieces, and it was so precious that even the Beck clan only had a few, as it took more than a decade to manufacture. However, now was not the time to be stingy with it. If eldest young master were to die, they would make an enemy of the society leader. Grip. After crushing the poison avoidance bead, Beck Saha mixed it with other medicinal substances from his waist, opened Na Yulriang's mouth and pushed it down his throat. I don't know how it turned out this way. Just a quarter of an hour ago he had achieved a breakthrough and was savoring the utmost joy. But now he was utterly confused. Both Mok Jiongun's rapid advancement in martial arts and these two trying to harm each other. As he was thinking that, Mok Jiongun suddenly approached. Why are you doing this? I apologize, but even if we don't kill him, I think I should take this. What? Before he could finish, Mok Jiongun plunged his index finger deep into Na Yulriang's right eye, whose acupoints had been sealed, rendering him unconscious. Then with his finger, squish, he gouged out Na Yulriang's right eyeball and pulled it out. Shocked by Mok Jiongun's sudden action, the Poison King Beck Saha was momentarily at a loss for words. Mok Jiongun showed the extracted eyeball to him and said with an eerie smile on his blood-covered face, "This is a bit troublesome, you see." Chapter 159 Choice 1. Mok Jiongun, smiling eerily while holding up eldest young master Na Yulriang's eyeball. For a moment the Poison King Beck Saha, at a loss for words, hurriedly applied pressure to stop the bleeding from Na Yulriang's right eye socket and urged Mok Jiongun. What are you doing? Beck Saha was genuinely dumbfounded. It wasn't as if he had mistaken the warning not to kill Na Yulriang as permission to do anything else. He couldn't comprehend what Mok Jiongun was thinking. To him Mok Jiongun said with a smile. It's as I said. This is a bit troublesome, you see. Troublesome? At Mok Jiongun's words, Beck Saha suddenly recalled what Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak had said a few years ago. Elder Beck. Have you ever sparred with eldest young master? Eldest young master, you say? Well, I haven't. I heard his martial prowess has progressed rapidly recently. Yes. So I sparred with him and was amazed. It's hard to compare to how he was before. Oh. To that extent. Yes. But not only his martial prowess, he also had a peculiar eye. A peculiar eye? Yes. One of his eyes glowed silver, and he was able to read my techniques more easily. Read your techniques with ease? Are you saying his eye possesses a unique power? That's what I think. Of course, eldest young master himself wouldn't reveal it. Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak was eldest young master Na Yulriang's teacher in Bare Hand, Bare Fist. He was the one Na Yulriang had requested teachings from as a benefit of obtaining the 3 tokens of the Corpse Blood Valley. Thus, among the 5 kings he was also the one who knew Na Yulriang the best. At this, Beck Saha clicked his tongue and said, I vaguely recall hearing about eldest young master's eye, but if it's truly a special eye, he'll be even more desperate to kill you for being unable to do so. It doesn't matter. We've already become enemies anyway. Mok Jiongun could tell because he sensed an affinity with Na Yulriang. The moment he woke up, Na Yulriang would do everything in his power to kill Mok Jiongun, no matter the means. He would probably stop at nothing. What a pity. It would be better to kill him now for the sake of the future. However, as Beck Saha said, if he were to kill the society leader's disciple, he would immediately become enemies with the society leader. There were things he needed to find out from the society leader, so he couldn't kill Na Yulriang right away. Therefore it was better to weaken Na Yulriang's power as much as possible. At that moment Mok Jiongun suddenly had a thought. Chong Ryong. Speak. What if Chong Ryong takes possession of this person's body? Upon reflection, it seemed like killing 2 birds with 1 stone if Chong Ryong possessed Na Yulriang's body. He wasn't just anyone but the society leader's first disciple, eldest young master Na Yulriang. If they could control him, they could approach the society leader and also eliminate the troublesome enemy that was Na Yulriang in one fell swoop. However, Chong Ryong said something unexpected. It's impossible. What? Didn't I say it's impossible? Why is that? When one breaks through their threshold and reaches the transformation realm through enlightenment, the energy within their body penetrates the essence, energy, and spirit, making not only their physical body but also their soul more resilient, rendering possession impossible. Have you tried it before? Do you think I haven't? Judging from Chong Ryong's tone, it seemed she had attempted it at least once. In that case, the plan to possess and control eldest young master Na Yulriang was out of the question. It was regrettable, but there was no other choice. As he was thinking that, the Poison King Beksaha stood up and said, I don't know what happened, but you've crossed a point of no return. To think you've made an enemy of eldest young master, of all people. Beksaha shook his head. To him, Mok Jeongeun bowed his head in courtesy and said, I apologize. Because of me, even you, master, have been put in a difficult position. Difficult? Yes. If it's difficult, then it's difficult. But what can we do about what has already occurred? I will never abandon my own. At his words, a glimmer of surprise flashed in Mok Jeongeun's eyes. The opponent was none other than the society leader's first disciple, eldest young master Na Yulriang. Putting aside his madness and cruelty, his supporters alone accounted for 40% of the Heaven and Earth Society. He had truly made the greatest enemy. Looking at it objectively, if Beksaha had not helped him just now and had expelled him on the spot, there would have been no need to become enemies with eldest young master Na Yulriang. Moreover, even now these words were unexpected. Not abandoning his own. Contrary to appearances, Beksaha seemed to place great importance on loyalty. Did he consider Mok Jeongeun, whom he had taken as a disciple, as his own as well? As he was puzzled, Beksaha said, Phew. We don't have much time, so let's quickly sort things out. Sort things out? Yes. I will ask you exactly 3 things. If you trust this master, answer them. At his words, Mok Jeongeun nodded and replied, I understand. Mok Jeongeun didn't trust anyone. However, since Beksaha had opposed Na Yulriang for his sake, it was no exaggeration to say that they were now in the same boat. In that case, it was appropriate to share information to a certain extent and bring Beksaha to his side. At that moment, Beksaha asked, How did you end up fighting with eldest young master? Eldest young master attacked me first. What? Eldest young master attacked you first? For what reason? Although eldest young master had aspects that differed from others, he was known to be a fairly rational person. Why would such a person suddenly attack Mok Jeongeun first? Who knows? I don't know either. Do you expect this master to believe that? It's the truth. I have a guess, but... A guess? Tell me. Mok Jeongeun shrugged and replied. It seemed like he was wary of me. Wary. At this, the Poison King Beksaha frowned and retorted. Then he alternated his gaze between eldest young master Na Yulriang and Mok Jeongeun's faces, and soon stroked his beard, letting out a groan. In fact, he understood to some extent. Hadn't he himself been surprised upon witnessing Mok Jeongeun's current martial prowess? Just a quarter of an hour ago, Mok Jeongeun had been at the peak realm, but now he had broken through his threshold and reached the transformation realm. No matter how he thought about it, this was almost impossible by common sense. How long had it taken even Beksaha to break through his threshold? Despite nearly decades of cultivation, he had only just managed to break through. Yet Mok Jeongeun, who was merely 17 years old, had accomplished this. In the current martial arts world, he had entered the realm of supreme masters at the youngest possible age. Come to think of it, it was Mok Jeongeun who had given him the catalyst for enlightenment. Then could it be that he had already reached the transformation realm? At this, Beksaha asked, When did you break through your threshold? Not long ago. May I ask exactly when? During my fight with eldest young master. At Mok Jeongeun's words, Beksaha's jaw unknowingly dropped for a moment. His assumption that Mok Jeongeun had already broken through his threshold was wrong. Then, did he mean that he had gained enlightenment while fighting an opponent stronger than himself? He could only express his astonishment as it was too absurd. Was this child born under the heavenly fortune? No, even the term heavenly fortune was insufficient. Without innate talent, it was impossible to gain enlightenment while fighting against others. Beksaha suppressed his excitement and soon asked. This is related to my second question. How did you master the wave demon poison scripture? He was already immensely curious about this as well. He had merely shown Mok Jaeongun the secret art once. The purpose was to let Mok Jaeongun know the excellence and greatness of the wave demon poison scripture. At his question, Mok Jaeongun pondered for a moment. Normally he would have concealed this talent, but Baek Saha had already witnessed everything. There was no way to hide it anyway. Left with no choice, Mok Jaeongun nonchalantly replied, "I learned it after seeing it once." What? Baek Saha's expression stiffened. He had only shown the secret art once, yet Mok Jaeongun claimed to have learned it by observing it? For a moment Baek Saha's mind became complicated. For someone who had cultivated martial arts for such a long time, they could quickly understand the principles of any martial art they encountered to a certain extent. However, it was a different matter to say that one could master a martial art after seeing it only once. Martial arts did not consist of just techniques. As one progressed to higher levels of martial arts, it was impossible to completely master them without comprehending the intent or meaning behind each technique. Baek Saha calmed himself and asked, "Do you truly mean that you mastered it after seeing it just once?" It's difficult to do so just by reading. While looking at the secret art, I read the traces of intent in the handwriting as mental images and stored them in my mind. Mental images? Oh my! Baek Saha let out an exclamation. Was this fellow, who was only 17 years old, capable of even visualizing mental images? It was truly astonishing. Even Baek Saha himself had only become able to visualize traces of intent in his mind upon reaching the peak of the peak realm, yet this young fellow could do it? This is truly a monster. Baek Saha had no choice but to acknowledge it. This child was in a realm that ordinary people could never hope to reach. It was a realm that could truly be called that of a genius. Baek Saha glanced at Na Yulriang. I understand now. He could see why Na Yulriang had been so wary of Mok Jaeongun. And all that was sharp would poke out of its handle. This child's talent was exactly like that. He possessed a monstrous aptitude for comprehending secret arts after a single reading and an absurd martial prowess that allowed him to gain enlightenment and break through his threshold while fighting. It was enough to instill fear, no, even a sense of awe. Perhaps I am witnessing the birth of a monster that will never be seen again in martial arts history. With such monstrous progress, perhaps within 20 years, Mok Jaeongun would reach the realm of the six heavens, considered the pinnacle of the martial arts world. As his thoughts reached this point, Baek Saha couldn't contain his excitement. Kiki. Even his hands and feet were trembling without him realizing it. If he had encountered Mok Jaeongun as an enemy, he would have had to kill him due to his talent. But that was not the case for Baek Saha. Hadn't he accepted this fellow as his disciple? It felt like fortune was piling up as a double blessing in his later years. Following me, there are now two individuals who will make the wave demon poison scripture prosper. There's no longer a need to worry about the successor of the main family. He had been content with just accepting Mok Jaeongun as his disciple. But now he truly wanted to make Mok Jaeongun a member of the Baek clan. Since Mok Jaeongun had already turned his back on the righteous factions and his family, there would be no issue in making him an adopted son of the Baek clan. This fellow is a treasure. The greatest treasure. He was so overjoyed that he felt like shouting out loud right away. However, now was not the time. They were still faced with a problem that needed to be resolved. Kikik. Good. This master's curiosity has been satisfied. Now for the final question. You have many questions, it seems. Of course there are many. Now you and this master are in the same boat. Don't we need to rely on each other to overcome this crisis? Crisis. It could indeed be considered a crisis. After all, they had made a troublesome enemy. What this master wants to ask is simple. What will you do now? What will I do, you ask? Yes. Now that we have made an enemy of eldest young master, there is only one path we can take. One path. Seemed he had something in mind. At this, Mok Jaeongun asked, "Do you have something in mind, master? Is there even a need to think about it? If eldest young master becomes the successor, both you and our Baek clan will be in a precarious position." Well, that's true. Then what should we do? We should ensure that someone other than eldest young master becomes the successor. Snap. Baek Saha snapped his fingers and said, "Exactly. That's precisely what I want to say. We must support a different successor other than eldest young master for us, master and disciple, to overcome this crisis and survive." Originally, eldest young master's support base was so strong that the other two successors had virtually no chance, but now the situation has changed. In what way? At Mok Jaeongun's question, the Poison King Baek Saha smirked and then said in a meaningful voice, "Depending on your choice, the dynamics can shift." Chapter 160 Choice 2. Originally, eldest young master's support base was so strong that the other two successors had virtually no chance, but now the situation has changed. In what way? At Mok Jaeongun's question, the Poison King Baek Saha smirked and said in a meaningful voice, "Depending on your choice, the dynamics can shift." I.e. choice. Yes. Your choice. Mok Jaeongun's choice. That was the Poison King Baek Saha's judgment. In fact, this judgment was not made lightly. Mok Jaeongun was the disciple of the Shadow Clan, which oversaw confidential matters and intelligence within the Heaven and Earth Society, and he was also the disciple of the Baek clan, which specialized in poison and mass killing. That alone placed him in a significantly important position. Within the Heaven and Earth Society, there are numerous martial arts families, sects and factions. Each of these groups, when gathered together, can become a great force, but among them, there are particularly important groups that play crucial roles. Representative examples are our Baek clan and the Shadow clan, which handles confidential matters. The power of these two groups was extremely important for those vying for the position of successor, considering their future prospects. That was why the second disciple Jang Nung-ak and the third disciple Wai So-yun coveted Mok Jaeongun. As if recalling this, Mok Jaeongun nodded. Moreover, an even greater variable of power has been born today. A variable of power. Kiki, it's none other than this master and you. Baek Saha said with a triumphant expression, shrugging his shoulders. Coincidentally, both Baek Saha and Mok Jaeongun had broken through their thresholds and reached the transformation realm. Even within the Heaven and Earth Society, only a handful of individuals had reached this realm, and their power was no exaggeration to say it was on par with the scale of a small to medium-sized sect. With the power of this master and you, we can change the dynamics of this competitive landscape. Even with just the two of us, it's sufficient. Kikik. I see. Why is your reaction so lackluster? Do you lack confidence in the power you possess? Baek Saha frowned and asked, dissatisfied with Mok Jaeongun's flat response. At this, Mok Jaeongun shook his head and replied, "It's not particularly that." "Then why do you seem so deflated?" "I just think it's meaningless if it's not definite." "If it's not definite? Don't tell me you're not satisfied even after breaking through your threshold. It's just a path that needs to be traversed anyway." Mok Jaeongun answered nonchalantly. At his words, Baek Saha inwardly clicked his tongue. Baek Saha had broken through his threshold after a long time, so he felt no regrets. Countless martial artists aspired to break through their thresholds and become supreme masters, but the reality was that many failed to surpass the first-rate level. Yet this child was continuously looking upward. Was his goal from the beginning different? At this, Baek Saha patted Mok Jaeongun's shoulder and spoke in a solemn voice. "Your words are correct. This master was about to be satisfied with a small achievement and failed to see the bigger picture. I was truly foolish as a cultivator of martial arts." Mok Jaeongun's eyes flickered with surprise at Baek Saha's self-reflection. Mok Jaeongun had not meant it in that sense. He simply believed that his current martial prowess was still insufficient, considering the various threads involving his targets of vengeance. To Mok Jaeongun, martial arts were merely a tool for revenge. Of course, for Baek Saha, who was unaware of this, Mok Jaeongun's attitude seemed like the true stance of a martial artist. "It seems that old man is misunderstanding something trivial." Chong Ryong chuckled, finding this scene amusing. At this, Mok Jaeongun shrugged and replied, "Misunderstanding is one's own freedom." "Well, that's true. By the way, Chong Ryong. What is it? Didn't we have a bet?" "What bet are you talking about?" "If I recall correctly, Chong Ryong clearly said that if I overcome the wall within 3 years, you would become my slave." "Ayawea." Chong Ryong screamed so loudly that it seemed like her ears would tear. Mok Jaeongun, who usually remained unfazed by most things, felt like his eardrums would fall out from the noise. "Ayawea. Are you going to keep doing this?" "Ayawea. I'll consider the bet void, so stop it. It's noisy." As soon as Mok Jaeongun nullified the bet, Chong Ryong fell silent as if nothing had happened. Mok Jae-un inwardly clicked his tongue at Chong Ryong's behavior. On the other hand, Chong Ryong inwardly let out a sigh of relief. She was already living a life as a spirit servant, no different from a slave, and if she had to treat this fellow like a true master on top of that, she would rather be completely annihilated. This annoying brat. It was a bet that could never have been valid in the first place. What kind of madman would reach the transformation realm within a mere 2 months of learning martial arts? If he had reached the transformation realm through enlightenment, it would have been understandable, but he had even forcibly penetrated the essence, energy, and spirit by inferring the flow of energy. He was truly a monstrous fellow. Perhaps he was a variable in and of himself, created by the heavens. At that moment, the Poison King Baek-saha spoke. I apologize for getting carried away with excitement and engaging in idle chatter. Anyway, as you said, regardless of achievements or such matters, we still need to make a choice. Given eldest young master's temperament, once he regains his senses, he will pressure you and this master in any way possible. His speed will be very swift. Mok Jae-un also agreed with this. If Na Yulriang was similar to him, it would be no exaggeration to say that the war would begin the moment he opened his eyes. In that case, as Baek-saha said, they had no choice but to build a force that even Na Yulriang could not recklessly move against. Your words are correct, master. Then will you choose Jang Nung-ak or Y So-yun? In this regard, I will fully follow your choice. In fact, the person Baek-saha had in mind was the youngest disciple, Y So-yun. The second disciple, Jang Nung-ak, had a treacherous side to him and was not a trustworthy figure. However, the reason he gave Mok Jae-un the choice was that he believed the future leaders of the Heaven and Earth Society would be the younger generation of successors, not his own generation. But this fellow will also choose Y So-yun, won't he? What Y So-yun lacked was a support base. If the Baek clan, the Shadow clan, and their master-disciple duo supported her, she could establish a force that rivaled eldest young master Na Yulriang. For now, Y So-yun is the most suitable candidate. With your astute insight, you should be able to see that much, right? That's what he thought, but then I think Jang Nung-ak would be better. What? For a moment, Baek-saha's expression stiffened. He was inwardly disappointed by Mok Jae-un's unexpected choice. No, why would you choose that fellow of all people? Among the three, Jang Nung-ak had the weakest martial prowess, was treacherous, and had a personality close to being reckless. In Baek-saha's view, Jang Nung-ak was the least suitable to be the society leader. At this, Baek-saha sighed and asked, "Are you sure about choosing Jang Nung-ak?" Since he had given Mok Jae-un the choice, it was difficult for him to openly oppose, but he at least wanted to know the reason. It was unlikely that this cunning fellow would make such a decision without any thought. Or could it be? Baek-saha's gaze turned towards the unconscious Wu Harang. He was aware that Wu Harang was the chief disciple of Bright Blade King Sun Yun and the leader of the Giant Watchtower group. He was said to be Y So-yun's right-hand man, wasn't he? Judging from the traces around, it seemed that Mok Jae-un had also fought him before eldest young master Na Yulriang. Could it be related to that? If that was the case, Baek-saha could mediate to some extent. Although he couldn't interfere with the enmity between the society leader's successor, he had some room to intervene in conflicts between young individuals. However, Jang Nung-ak's subordinates are extremely loyal to their lord, regardless of what kind of person he is. On the other hand, Y So-yun's subordinates seem to view her as a woman to be admired rather than their lord, regardless of her character. What? A woman to be admired? Yes. Oh my. At Mok Jae-un's words, a sigh of disappointment escaped Baek-saha's mouth. He had intended to mediate if the conflict was the cause. However, if what Mok Jae-un said was true, it meant that Y So-yun lacked the fortune of having talented subordinates, regardless of her character. Of course, if they supported her, the situation would improve considerably. But if the person who was to become the leader fundamentally lacked the ability to lead subordinates, supporting them would not end the problem. Could her beauty be a disaster? Y So-yun was a peerless beauty. Any man would inevitably fall for her dazzling beauty. Baek-saha had not considered this to be a significant problem. He believed that as long as she led her subordinates with strong leadership, it would be fine. However, if her close subordinates viewed her as an object of desire rather than their lord, as Mok Jae-un said, he might need to reconsider. If she can't lead her subordinates. He couldn't say that Mok Jae-un's judgment was wrong. Although Jang Nung-ak's personality and talent could be considered inferior to Wai So-yun's, when it came to the position of leading a group, Jang Nung-ak seemed to be the better choice. At this, Baek Saha nodded, indicating his understanding. All right. Do as you wish. Then go to Jang Nung-ak and convey your intentions. I understand. Then what about you, Master? I will quickly clean up this place, meet with the Shadow Clan leader to inform him of this matter, and then discuss an alliance between the Shadow Clan and the Baek Clan. He had indeed needed someone to handle the situation. Thinking it was a good opportunity, Mok Jae-eun clasped his hands in a gesture of gratitude towards the Poison King Baek Saha. Thank you. Kiki, what are you thanking me for? Your affairs are now this master's affairs as well. What are you doing? Hurry. We need to quickly establish our forces before eldest young master wakes up. I understand. Then I'll leave it to you. With those words, Mok Jae-eun turned his body and approached someone who was lying unconscious. At this, Baek Saha frowned and asked, "What are you trying to do? Didn't this master say he would handle things here?" I think I need to take this friend with me." The person Mok Jae-eun pointed to was none other than Wu Harang, the grand leader of the Giant Watchtower group and a close subordinate of the third disciple, Wai So-yun. At this, Baek Saha, not understanding, asked, "Why would you, who said you're going to meet Jang Nung-i, take that fellow with you? Don't tell me you're planning to give him as a gift to show your support." "No. It's not that. I'm going to visit Wai So-yun first." "What? Now what was this about? He said he wouldn't choose Wai So-yun, so why was he going to her?" As Baek Saha was puzzled, Mok Jae-eun approached him and whispered something quietly in his ear. Hearing this, Baek Saha frowned and asked, "No. Is that even possible?" "We'll know once we try. I'm not sure if you'll unnecessarily provoke Wai So-yun." Baek Saha couldn't hide his concern. However, Mok Jae-eun, as if not minding it at all, hoisted the unconscious Wu Harang over his shoulder and said, "We'll know once we try. Then please take care of cleaning up this place. That friend lying over there is Suk Young, the escort the Shadow Clan leader assigned to me. You can take him with you when you go to the Shadow Clan." Having made his request, Mok Jae-eun carried Wu Harang and left. Watching his back, Baek Saha clicked his tongue. He wasn't sure if things would go according to the fellow's intentions. Would Wai So-yun, who desired to be the society leader of the Heaven and Earth Society, accept that? He was concerned that it might only increase the number of enemies. Baek Saha, who had been staring in the direction Mok Jae-eun had gone, clicked his tongue and soon approached the unconscious eldest young master Na Yeol-ryang. He didn't know how things had come to this point, but the war of life and death with this fellow had begun. However, now that the war had started, he had no intention of losing. "Since you've touched me and the Baek clan, be prepared for the consequences." Baek Saha, who had issued a warning in his mind, carefully glanced around. He couldn't detect anything with his senses. After surveying the surroundings, Baek Saha, slyly placed his foot on eldest young master Na Yeol-ryang's right ankle and applied force, pressing down firmly. Crack. The sound of the ankle breaking could be heard. Since his right wrist was already broken and his right eyeball had been taken by Mok Jae-eun, it wouldn't be strange if his right ankle was additionally broken here, would it? Kakik. The residence of the society leader's third disciple, Wai So-yun. A man with a bruised face was entering that place. He was Yeep Wai-seon, the youngest disciple of Bright Blade King Sun Yun. "Oh, Brother Yeep." As he entered the pavilion, a young man who had been training by balancing a large stone on a thick short sword in the courtyard of the residence greeted him cheerfully. His name was Yang Ayao. He was the leader of the Transient Sword Group, 1, and one of Wai So-yun's close subordinates. "Brother Yang." Yeep Wai-seon clasped his hands in a greeting, his face somewhat flushed. Inwardly he was extremely embarrassed. He had gone to the Corpse Blood Valley to report but ended up fighting with a trainee, and to make matters worse, he had caused an incident that resulted in him being locked up in a dark room for several days of secluded training. He thought he would be imprisoned for at least a few months. However, for some reason his master Bright Blade King Sun Yun had released him about half a quarter of an hour ago. "If you cause trouble one more time, you'll truly be in secluded training for a year. Understand?" Of course, he had given a chilling warning. At this, Yeep Wai-seon had even shed tears as he begged for forgiveness. It was fortunate that no one had seen it, but thinking about it now made his teeth grind. If it weren't for that bastard named Mokjin, he wouldn't have suffered like this and fallen out of favor with the young lady. That son of a bitch. Someday he would get his revenge. He had already heard that the bastard had become the disciple of the Shadow Clan leader. At least that was fortunate. If the bastard had become the disciple of the Thunderbolt Fist King or his master Bright Blade King Sun Yun, it would have been difficult to seek revenge, but since he became the disciple of an executive below the Five Kings, there would always be an opportunity. Anyway, this wasn't important right now. He was already on his way here with his master's orders. Brother Yang. Where's our senior brother? Is he with the young lady? Grand Leader Wu Harang has gone to fetch someone on the young lady's orders. He went to fetch someone? Then where did he go? Why? Did something happen? Our master is looking for him. Did the Bright Blade King master call for him? Yes. Grand Leader Wu Harang is waiting for someone named Mok Jiangan near the residence of the Poison King's Beck clan. At those words, Yip Weixian tilted his head. Now what was this about? Why was he waiting for Mok Jiangan near the Beck clan's residence? Why? What do you mean why? It's to recruit him, of course. What? Yip Weixian showed disgust at those words. He was already planning to tell the young lady that they shouldn't recruit Mok Jiangan, that bastard, especially after learning that he was a hostage of the righteous faction. But what was this absurd news? This wouldn't do. If this was true, he had to immediately inform the young lady. Creak. At that moment, the entrance to the residence opened and someone entered. Yip Weixian's expression instantly distorted hideously. That was because the one who had entered was none other than that damn bastard. Mok Jiangan. However, it's been a while. What a coincidence. This person is your senior brother, right? What? Thud. Mok Jiangan lifted someone he was carrying on his shoulder with one hand as if he were a sack. Seeing him, Yip Weixian and Yang Aiel's eyes simultaneously widened. No way. A senior brother? The person lifted by Mok Jiangan's hand was none other than Wu Harang, the chief disciple of Bright Blade King Sun Yun and one of the Five Tigers, known as the top successors of the Heaven and Earth Society. He was known to be someone that only executives could handle, yet seeing him unconscious and covered in blood, as if he had suffered serious injuries, the two couldn't hide their shock.